Thank you to everyone who's joining us today. We are really excited to, as we talked ahead of time, just kind of help cut through the noise. A lot of talk out there today about artificial intelligence, and we really do see this holding a lot of promise to not only augment the labor, but also improve efficiencies within the ag sector. So today I'm thrilled to be joined by turn it over to Rishi, who's going to give us a little bit of an overview of agriculture's adoption of technology, as well as the early advancement of AI. It's all yours, Rishi.
Thank you, Jacqui, and thank you for having us. And I'm excited to discuss this issue with the panel and you, Jacqui, and I'm looking forward to some of the questions. So Jacqui did give a quick introduction about the bio. Here's a little more detail. As she said, I write a blog, a newsletter. If you scan the QR code at the bottom right, you can sign up for free. And today, before we get into the discussion of AI, what the panelists and Jacqui thought it would be useful to do is to frame the discussion and baseline us in terms of, how does technology get actually adopted and along what timelines and what is needed to for technology adoption? Because when you think about AI, it's a relatively new piece of technology which has come along, which is very powerful. And people have questions. Is it a fad? Is it, is it going to kill all of us? Will all of us lose our job? We have all these important questions. And so we thought it would be interesting to look at some historical perspective on how some of the common technologies that we use today, what was the timeline to adopt them? And is the rate of adoption increasing as things are moving along? So, let's look at some examples. If you go to the next slide, I want to start with something which is known as an Amara's law. Now, Amara was a researcher and a scientist, and one of his key observations was that as human beings, we overestimate the impact and effect of technology in the short run. And, we see examples of that today, right? When we think about AI, we think, oh, in the next 2 years, none of us will have a job. And, we'll do what the robots tell us to do, right? And so I don't think that is going to happen. And so this is a very good example of how we overestimate the effect of technology in the short run. But we are equally bad at sort of estimating what will happen in the long run, right? We underestimate the effect in the long run. And so this is sort of how our human brain works. And if we realize that, then we can, frame and understand how to approach and how to engage with these technologies. So let me give you some examples. If we go to the next slide, this is some data on consumer adoption of some consumer technology. And on the x-axis is, the timeline, and then on the y-axis is what percentage of US households adopted this technology. And so if you don't notice anything else, but if you can see that the curves are getting steeper as it comes closer to the current day, right? And so, for example, the landline telephone, it took 50, 60 years for about 50% of the US population to get access to. But if you look at something like computers or the internet, the adoption was much faster. And so then the question becomes, why do certain technologies get adopted quicker compared to some other technology? And there are two main reasons why, which control the adoption of technology at a very high level. One, is this better and useful than what we had seen in the past? And telephones were a much better way to communicate, or internet is a much better way to communicate than what we had in the past. That is one. And second is there a distribution mechanism to get this technology in people's hands? And how effective is that, right? So if you think about the telephone, you had to build all these, lay telephone cables, build these networks, build these, exchanges and all that. And that was a very expensive and a time-consuming proposition. But when it came to the internet, we already had a lot of that distribution infrastructure in place. And that is why the internet adoption was much faster. So let's look at maybe one or two more examples. If you go to the next slide, these are some more recent examples, right? And you can think about Netflix or Twitter or Instagram or Spotify, right? These technologies, which are digital in nature, the adoption was insanely fast. And if you look at ChatGPT, it's not a curve, it's a straight line going up. Here, the y-axis is a little bit different. It is number of people using the technology. But this speaks to those two vectors that I talked about, right? Is it useful? And is the distribution mechanism already in place? So to use Netflix, you need to have a good internet connection, and the product has to be good. If those two are together, then you see fast adoption. In the case of ChatGPT, the product has to be good, which, depending on, how you use it, a lot of people like it, and it's easily available. If you have a smartphone, you can use ChatGPT, right? So the distribution mechanism is already there. So that is something that you have to think about when we think about any new technology, and we will talk about this in the context of AI. So maybe if we move forward, here's some, this is probably the last example. This is adoption of new ag technologies, right? These are some of the GMO crops, the BT crops that started in the mid-1990s, and the adoption rate is fairly quick, even though it's a physical product. And again, the same two reasons apply. One, this was much better along certain dimensions compared to the previous generation of technology. And second, through the ag retail network, through the supplier network, there was a very well-established distribution channel to get these seed products into farmers' hands. And that is why you see this adoption fairly quickly. Within 10, 15 years, you had more than 50% of the acres using this new technology. So again, we wanted to start the discussion by framing and sort of looking back and say, how do these technologies get adopted and what really drives the adoption curve? There has to be value, and there has to be a way to distribute that product and get that product into your customers' hands. So yeah, let's keep going and maybe hand it back to Jacqui to actually begin the AI discussion. So I hope this framing of how technology gets adopted was useful, and we'll refer back to it when it makes sense. Jacqui, over to you.
Very good. Well, and I'm going to take the liberty and I'm going to switch around the questions, because I really love that quote you talked about, overestimating the effect of the technology. And we're going to leave it right with you, Rishi. There's been a lot of enthusiasm about lots of different technology over the years, and you talked about some of those, but why is this different? Why is AI, we saw that chart about ChatGPT going as a straight line, not even as a curve. Well, it starts with you, and everybody feel free to chime in about why this technology could be a game changer, and why we might be on the tip of really seeing the power of it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question to begin with. I think the one thing is, you see this vertical line, right? The reason people use something is because they find value in it, right? I think that is a clear indication that this is powerful. And, it does a really good job in certain scenarios, right? So where you have a lot of data, where you have data which is not structured properly, and I'm sure Lawrence can talk a lot about that, and Tom as well, given they deal with this on a day-to-day basis. And it can basically, it has learned all the data that's out there on the internet, right? More or less. And so It is very data rich, it is very fast, and it can be applied to many situations which are very prevalent in agriculture. So you have, within agriculture, you have a lot of different types of data. You have data coming from your yield monitors, and you have data coming from your scouting notes, and you make phone calls. And it's very difficult to wrangle all that data together to make sense of it. Whereas these newer technologies, they are very useful and very powerful to make sense of that. Having said that, and as we'll get into that discussion, there are still some other things which are needed to make them really work and provide value. And we will talk about that, like things like expertise in the domain that you're working in, which I'm sure the audience has in spades. And how do you design new workflows? How do you deliver that experience? I think all of those matter. So I think that's a very good example of Amara's law, where we might overestimate what you can do in the short term. I think the other difference with this technology is the user experience is very different. When you want to learn a new piece of software, you have to really understand where the menus are, and click this, click that. You need to follow a certain way to do things. I mean, I think all of us must have experience, supporting your grandma, grandpa, and navigate their smartphone, which are fairly easy to use, but there's a certain way to use it. Whereas with these technologies, you can just talk to them in the natural way that we have, learned how to talk for generations in human language, right? So I think there are certain things which make these really powerful. So that's why I'm very excited and bullish about, this piece of technology.
Anybody else want to chime in on why this technology might be different?
I can say something quick because I think you hit right on it, Rishi. I think one of the most important things, this is really the first time where we've seen like natural language human talking really interacting with the information. And when the information, as Rishi said, the LLMs or the large language models, they learned it like we learned it. So they were reading it in a sense, just like we read information. So I think that's the most interesting piece of this whole thing is we're both the technology, the AIs, and us, we've consumed it the same way. So it's super interesting that way.
Kind of building on that, because I think everybody wants to know, well, what does this mean for me? How can I put this into use in whatever fashion? Tom, share some of the ways that you're working with companies to integrate AI into their front offices, back offices, into the field. And I know, Lawrence, you're going to have some good insight on this too. So we'll start here with you, Tom, and then Lawrence, we'll get your insight on this as well.
Yeah. My specialty, what we do at Altus, is a lot more back office kind of regular implementation. I'm excited to hear Lawrence and his cool implementations, but what we're seeing a lot, and this is kind of where a lot of people are getting the on-ramp of AI, is just we're leveraging AI to do some of these things that are mundane tasks, summarizing emails, looking at the financials, bringing the data together, like Rishi said, and serving that up in natural language. That saves time if you're a director, executive, and you're trying to, get that board prep going. We really encourage AI to pull from the KPIs and really drafting these narratives, which are more in a human readable format from the ERP, and even starting to see things forecasting maintenance, service logs, usage data, things like that. But where we're seeing the hiccups at times is people thinking they can just jump in and just apply it. And what we really encourage people to do is right now is the time to kind of look at yourself and understand your own business clarity. You really want to get your systems maps in order so you understand your underlying system, your data is clean, your information is clean. And when we see that allows the AI to get much better traction.
You're still on mute, Lawrence.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, to build off of what Tom had mentioned here, I think there's a lot of use cases, and particularly as we're speaking about agriculture. But I kind of look historically at agriculture, and if you think about everything that AI encompasses, and most of the news headlines and everything else has been around large language models and generative AI. And that, started back in 2022. Before that, agriculture leveraged AI, but it was more on the basis of computer vision and machine learning. And so this, and they were an industry that adopted this, fairly well in relation to other industries. And so there's been experience within agriculture of leveraging AI. And then so what has changed since 2022 and as these LLMs have gone mainstream? And there's a couple different things that have changed. One of which is that the modality, when I say modality, I mean the ability to speak, point and click, video, imaging, all of that now can be interpreted through an LLM and then parsed out into data that could then be used by machine learning models. So the idea, the challenge before was the machine learning models didn't have really good data to be able to drive accurate insights. And now that's changing to where now that data can start to be pieced together in a better way, and resulting in the machine learning models being more accurate. But there's also other models that have been discovered over the last, let's say 10 years. Now, when we build machine learning models or even computer vision models, most of those algorithms have been identified. And so now you're taking a base model and you're just fine tuning it. Whereas before it was, you had to really get a lot of data scientists involved to figure out, hey, what algorithms are we going to use, and train those. And then it doesn't work. And then you start from scratch. And so there's been a lot of progress in that space. And so now you kind of bring that all together and you say, okay, now with generative AI kind of brings it to the masses. We don't have to build machine learning models and invest in these computer vision models, even though there's still investments going on there and there will be in the future. But now bringing it to the masses through being able to speak to this in different modalities. So just natural language. That's where I think the agriculture space is starting to see the value. When we talk with retailers, we meet with retailers and input companies, on a weekly basis. And even independent agronomists are out there using these tools on their own. So some might be leveraging ChatGPT to do some type of image recognition. Some might be using it just to capture notes simply as they're out in the field. But they're starting to use these things now. And so I think kind of to get into Tom's point, the modality of this and being able to speak to this is what's giving it its first breath of air. And then comes, well, how do we put that into value? And so there's lots of use cases I'm sure we'll talk about today in where that goes.
Let's kind of cue in a little bit there about the cost, right? There is a cost of not acting. And in this space too, technology is sometimes really expensive. This iteration is a little less expensive, and maybe it's more costly to not act. So maybe Rishi, you want to kind of dig into that a little bit more, but the cost of not acting and why it's important to maybe start to dabble, start to look at some of those areas where maybe AI can provide some solutions.
Yeah, I think there is, with any new technology, there's a learning curve that you have to go through to learn how to use it. And one view could be that, hey, this thing is changing so quickly on a day-to-day basis. Let me just wait for 3 years, let this get mature, and then I can engage. And with any new technology, you always see a bell curve of adoption. There are always early adopters, and then there's a big chunk in the middle. Now, the question you have to ask yourself is, as a business person, do you want to compete more effectively with somebody else who is not going to use this technology, right? Do you want to be an early adopter so that you, one, learn how to use this technology, understand its nuances, really understand what are some of your problems and use cases that it will work, and what are the things where it might not be a good fit? Because at the end of the day, you want to drive positive business outcomes for your business and better outcomes for your customers, right? So the risk of not engaging is that, one, you are not getting onto the learning curve. Number two, what that means is the other people who are getting on that learning curve, they are going to get value from this and experiment and learn. And the cost factor is important, right? I think one of the things that we are seeing a difference with this new technology is that the cost of experimentation has gone down significantly. So you don't have to spend millions of dollars to do a new project. And in fact, I would challenge all the business leaders on this webinar to say, give all your employees, pay for their access to the latest, pick your favorite, ChatGPT, Gemini, model. Pay the $200 a year for your employees. Let them experiment with these tools. You can maybe, cancel one of your top golf outings. I know that will make it a little bit unpopular, but I think the value that you will get in giving all your employees access to these tools, and they will learn with you. And bottom up, they'll bring use cases to say, hey, I thought about this or that. Let's try this. So yeah, I think the costs of not engaging won't be visible today, but it'll be visible, 2-3 years down the line when you suddenly look around and say, oh crap, I didn't keep up with this, and all my other competitors are, and your customers are going to demand it, right? Because they're going to look for these better experiences that someone else might be able to provide them by using these technologies.
That was one thing that I quoted in my paper about, look for your customers, but also where do you want to see your customers go? Because if you're just staying where some of them are, you may miss out on where you could take them all and solve problems for not only your operation, but also their operation as well. And so much of this is about re-engaging with your farmer customer, enhancing what you're able to do, building on that. And we talked about this in our pre-call together, and it was something that I tried to weave into the paper that I put together about the transfer of domain knowledge, and also the fear that this is going to replace jobs, but really there's a power to augment your workforce. And so the pairing together of the augmenting your workforce as well as establishing that domain knowledge to be able to pass on to someone else. Lawrence, I'm going to give it to you first, because your application, your Ag Pilot, really empowers agronomists to be able to capture information, whether that's somebody's birthday or their son's going to college, whatever it might be, as well as their buying patterns. And that goes beyond just that one person's head, that agronomist keep it in their head, but really has it at their fingertips. So talk a little bit about the augmenting labor as well as preserving that domain knowledge with AI.
Sure. And this is specific to Ag Pilot, which is kind of one set of use cases that produce value. There's many, many more, but the ones that we focused on were around in the retail space, and they were focused directly on agronomists. So how can we, number one, enrich their relationships with their customers? Two, give them time back in the day, effectively making them more efficient. And three, give them differentiated expertise. And we did that by, we did 3-month product research with about 30 different agronomists from all the different retailers, and asking them, what are the pain points during the day, and how can we solve these with generative AI? And where we arrived at is they spend a tremendous amount of time getting into systems. They got an ERP, they have perhaps a CRM, they've got agronomic systems, perhaps they have pricing systems. There's lots of systems that they have to get into, log in, and go through that more traditional point and click interface to drill down to the customer information they need, perhaps cut and paste that piece that they need, paste it in a notepad, and then kind of build out a complete picture that they can then go and have a conversation with their customer around. And so in our case, we focused on, okay, well, if we can integrate with these different systems and provide them a chat interface, a natural language interface that they could just ask these questions, then we can allow our system just to go in, get the relevant information, pull it together, package it, and give it back to them in a very quick and effective way. And so that's sort of the area of efficiency that we were focused on. Also, you can get insights out of it. So if there's weather events and they impact your customers, Well, that's an opportunity to reach out. If we give you the notification, heck, if we even tee up the message that you may want to send to your customer, it reduces that friction. And now you're enriching that customer relationship because you're getting more touch points. And you're also impacting your differentiated expertise because you now have information, whether it's timely information or facts that you didn't have before, you're now providing those to the customer. And so in terms of the domain knowledge, um, I think this isn't more of an artifact of retailers not using CRM traditionally than anything else. But being able to capture customer notes and customer preferences very quickly, with your voice, on the go, and having that stored and then having that acted upon. So that becomes part of the context in future questions around that customer that these LLMs can now include. And then in the returned information, somehow, those preferences have now found their way into changing a little bit of the insights and how that's communicated back to the customer. And so those are the areas that we really focused on for now. But there's so many other areas. That's just sort of on the agronomist advisor side. But if you look at your business like any other business and you break it up into functional areas and you think about, you've got whatever your business is, but your business model and your operations side, HR, accounting, and so forth, each one of those functions can leverage AI and has use cases to work through.
I'd also say, just to kind of double click on what you're saying there, Lawrence, and what Rishi said with, getting ahead of the curve a little bit. The other big thing that it does when you start to use these, even if it's just simple things that Rishi was mentioning, is it changes your mindset too. And the mindset change is so important because now you start to think of different ways that you can leverage that same AI. I mean, I love your points, Lawrence. It's going to start to allow me to speak all these things I know about Lawrence, and then that adds it to the CRM without me thinking about it later, or maybe I forgot it later. But what I find myself, the more I use AI, the more interesting things I'm starting to ask it, and the more interesting conversations it's starting to have back with me. So, it's as simple as like, when you type out, a recommendation, did I forget anything? Or, it just changes your mindset and it changes the way you think and work with it. It really, truly, and I think this answers the question as well, Jacqui, is it becomes a partner with you as you're going about your day. And it's just, to me, it's always continuing to grow and get better all the time, learning about me, learning about the things I do, learning about the clients that I serve as well. So, yeah.
And that's where the power of the augmentation comes. And, people are fearful that it's going to replace them, but those who embrace this technology have the ability to be smarter. You're only the tool is only as smart as what you're putting into it, but it's helping you. Somebody, I don't remember who it was, but talked about it kind of like a chess game, because you are making a move, but then you're asking, okay, is this the right? Is there something that maybe I didn't think of? And you're being enlightened through this partnership in some ways with this technology. And again, it's easy to fear, but we're starting to see more case studies that show that this is effective for, again, augmenting the labor, not displacing the labor, and really leaning into that as well. Along those lines, the power, agriculture is very unique. And there's also tons of companies now that are jumping into the space because of the fact that AI is out there, and open AI things. You talked about this, Lawrence, about how the process, the technology has come along, but the power of knowing a partner that knows agriculture. Why is that important? I know that you guys have all had varying degrees, but been in this space for a while. Why is it important for those who are listening in to seek out partners in the space that understand agriculture? Because agriculture has its nuances that are different than other industry segments in the country. I'm going to give it to you for yeah. Go ahead, Rishi.
Okay. Yeah, I think, as both Lawrence and Tom touched on that. I'll build on what they just said, which is to deliver a good solution. There are a couple of pieces you need in place, right? So one is, yes, you need these AI modeling technologies, whether it's chat, whatever it is, ChatGPT, whatever you use, and these, as we said, these models have sucked up all the data that's out there on the internet. Well, I shouldn't say all, a lot of it. But as Jacqui very rightly said, the context in which your customer operates is super important, and that can really change what you tell them to do or what you advise them to do, right? Let's say you are an agronomist. What you tell Lawrence because he farms in a certain way would be very different than what you would tell Tom because his context is very different. And if you don't understand that context and what the implications of that context are, your output that you provide is not going to be valuable. In fact, it will be bad and you would not trust it, right? And I think that's where having people who deeply understand the economy, or whatever business you're applying these models in is super important, because the models on their own, they don't understand your context. They don't understand the implications of the context and what that means in terms of how you should approach that. And so that's why it's going to be a partnership between people who have deep domain knowledge, and this is basically people who are in the audience here on this panel, in this webinar, and then people who really understand how to apply that technology, which would be people like Lawrence and Tom. I mean, they're a bit of an outlier. They understand both the ag side and the technology side, but you need those experts to come together and collaborate, because these models on their own will not be able to deliver the value that you need, because it is very much context dependent. And I think that's where the domain knowledge and the relationship with the farmer customer, they have to trust you, access to that distribution channel, all of those things become important. And it's the model and the technology is one piece, but all these other things have to come together for you to be able to deliver something which is valuable to your customer.
When you speak of context too, Rishi, I think a lot about people talking about like hallucinations, and I think there's a little bit of miscommunication, in my opinion. The AI models, they're going to answer your question with the best answer it can come up with the data that it was given. So when you look at context, if you don't give it as much context as you can, it will answer the question. I mean, what is the best color in the world? If we end the question at that, it's going to come up with whatever it thinks it is, and maybe we just didn't give it enough data. And I think that's the same thing when we look at really helping customers understand their own systems and processes, because when you can map out their systems, you can map out their processes, now all of a sudden we've added a boatload of context, and now those answers and the help and the next steps become a lot more clear.
Just want to remind everybody again to love to hear questions that you guys have as you're listening to some of the insight that our panelists are sharing. Somebody said maybe don't do the golf outing, but give all your employees the access to ChatGPT or Gemini, whatever it might be. Within that, though, why is it important to have some guardrails? We forget that certain AI applications are public. So if we're taking our customer data and entering it into a public system, what concerns are there? And what needs to happen from the management standpoint to make sure that you are ensuring the privacy of that data, depending on what AI system you might need to be encouraging or utilizing when it comes to those guardrails. Maybe I'll hand it over to you first.
Yeah, I think the first thing to note is, as you get into the premium products, that's the first thing you get a lot of. When you're using the free products, there's a lot less data protection, data privacy there. So if we just look at two common ones with ChatGPT, when you start to purchase that enterprise or team, depending on what size you do, that's one of the promises they give you, or one of the protections that you get, is the data that you use there is then protected and not used always in that LLM models. You need to check your settings also on ChatGPT. There's a settings button that'll say, do not use my data for training. That's another good tip to use there. Same, and that's kind of the flip side. If you look at like a Microsoft or a Copilot, it's not really taking your data out of the ecosystem. It's coming into your system and using your data there. So you've already got a walled garden of sorts with your data and information. So yeah, you just have to be very, very careful. There's not a lot of cases that some of this data gets exposed, but it's very much a risk, and it's something you want to make sure you're taking care of.
Lawrence, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I agree with Tom on this point. I think that I think it's more of a value thing. I think individually you can use these tools and they'll help you individually to some extent. Like let's say everybody has a personal ChatGPT account and they're all following the policy of not disclosing any proprietary business data. Because these things require context to be even more useful, then it's sort of a limited value proposition, right? Maybe it could summarize an email, assuming there's no proprietary information in the email. Maybe it could do some kind of lightweight personal stuff for you. But I think the real power is when you do allow it to get in, have access to some of these other systems. And so ChatGPT has that through Microsoft. There's Microsoft's GPT, and being able to have access to SharePoint and have access to some of these other systems allow it to kind of further embed into calendaring and email and that type of thing, and make it what I think it provides a lot more value. And actually the answers are more relevant when it has access to that data, but that really requires a corporate approval to understand, how do we leverage this as in our corporate tenant or our corporate cloud and then expose it down. So that's kind of but a lot of companies do have issues, and rightfully so, with being able to do that.
It looks like we finally have a few questions coming in, so I'm going to turn to those because I love the interaction. The first question is, can any of you share some of the, a few examples or use cases that you came across of utilizing AI in ag that were unexpected or surprising? So something that maybe you went into it and was not as expected, maybe in a good way or a bad way.
Yeah, one I can share for sure is just, and it's kind of rudimentary, but it goes back to the training and the context that Rishi was talking about, is using it when you're summarizing emails or looking at certain pieces of data. There's not a lot of context sometimes with that data, and it was able to pick up right away what that context of that data was. It knew that it was data coming in from an energy, an ethanol energy system, and it started to figure that out as, just a little bit of extra information was put in there. So I think it just plays into Rishi's point of there's just a lot of data on the internet that these are consuming, and it's really surprises you at times at what it can know about those information systems.
Yeah, one I could quickly build on is for AgPilot, these LLMs are non-deterministic. So you may ask the same question 3 or 4 times and get 3 or 4 answers that are close but not exactly the same. And so what's fun is we'll just ask all types of different questions to try to really test and validate the system. And the stuff that it comes back with, sometimes you would ordinarily characterize as a bug, but all of a sudden it turns out to be a feature. And one of those is that we were asking around inventory, product inventory, and we were very much focused on the retailer's inventory at a particular location. And I don't know why it interpreted the question to be coming like on the grower's inventory of these products, but of course it hallucinated. But the response came back and said, yes, your customer has this many pounds of fertilizer in the barn, and it's probably time for them to reorder. And I'm like, wow. If that was an accurate response and I knew exactly how much a customer had in inventory of this stuff, you could really be proactive and start having the advisors market to this. So sometimes it turns out to be a feature rather than a bug.
And I think that's another thing that I know that I talked about in my paper, making sure that multiple divisions in your company can talk to each other, right? So we have an agronomy side, we have sales side, but then being able to link that up to your grain merchandisers, how much, because of what we know we put in the ground and what we estimate their yield to be, how are we talking or allowing the talking between those two divisions to help maximize grain merchandising on the other side of that? So again, too, just being able to really lean into it. One of these other questions is that talk about being being a knowledgeable AI user. And that's part of the challenge of the AI promise, to be able to have a deep enough knowledge, because sometimes we ask that question because we don't know the answer. So we're asking a question of AI because we don't know it. So how to best, you know, counter with our own knowledge of what is a hallucination or what is true, or that chess game, right? How does it make us better? So, you know, maybe dig in a little bit deeper about the challenges of making sure that you can trust the information that's given to you, and how, as a user, how you can help verify and improve those models, right? Because some of these are only as good as what is put in, which we've talked about. So how can we help, you know, how can a user make sure the information is accurate, improve their ability to respond and test the accuracy of that, and in the long game be able to improve what it's able to do?
And I think Lawrence touched on that for sure when he spoke about, maybe asking the question multiple times, especially when you're talking about things that maybe you're not quite sure about. Triangulate that, but you can also ask, where did you get this? Where did you get the data to answer this question? And it will provide its sources as well. So I think those are some ways that you can do that, without going crazy and, just doing the research yourself. Both of those ways work very, very well.
Yeah, I would say it's sort of an 80-20 rule for us. And we think about this in terms of solving there's two types of problems that we're trying to solve. We're staying away from one, but going after another. And the one we're trying to solve are the soft edge problems, where if we do get it wrong, it's not catastrophic. It's okay if we're 80% accurate, it still provides value, as opposed to hard edge problems that think of air traffic control. The magnitude of the risk is so great that you can't be wrong. And so in those contexts, it's not a useful tool at the moment, or there has to be a lot of validation that goes behind that. I think that this is also more of the responsibility of the AI providers, that are specifics, kind of like us, that are specific to agriculture, that we have evaluation and validation mechanisms in place that double check the answer. Because if you imagine, let's say, hey, I want to check inventory, for example. I don't trust this number. Well, now you have to go back into an inventory system and do the whole point and click, which discounts the whole value of AI if you're doing that every time. And so having those mechanisms in place, like with us, when we get data from the different systems, we know we can trust the data that you get from other systems. It's the moment that you package that together and hand it to the LLM to reason off of it. Then it could change numbers. We've seen inventory, we've seen pricing, we've seen a lot of data being changed. And so it's important that the provider has mechanisms built in to say, hey, this is what we got out of the systems that we trust. This is what we got back from the LLM. Let's make sure these two match before returning that result to the user.
Yeah, and just one more thing on top of that, Lawrence. Every one of these LLMs, all these AI tools, they have different models too. So like sometimes you're using a model that's quick, easy, is going to get back to you quick. Sometimes it's one that's going to do a little more research, a little more digging. So you got to be careful and understand which one of the models you're using, because that can provide the same information. As Lawrence is saying, sometimes it's going to give you a quick answer. Sometimes it's going to give you, a complete answer as well.
Right.
So I know we have a lot of CoBank people on the call, as well as a lot of Farm Credit members as well. One of my favorite CoBank colleagues asked this question: have financial institutions used and validated AI to evaluate credit risk? And how does Fair Isaacs position itself to support or discount the use of AI when they're proud of these models they've built to score credit? So maybe I know that, we do have some retailer co-ops on the call, but, from the financial side, how are we seeing AI be able to possibly integrate into evaluating credit risk?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a fair question. I guess it's about Fair Isaac, so it's a fair question. Sorry, that was a bad joke. So I think, you already see some examples of people, maybe, it's not directly like, oh, let's come up with a credit score, using this model, that I think that is sort of people are experimenting with these things. But even upstream of that, a lot of data gets into, let's say, calculating a credit score, right? How can we do that much more efficiently and quickly? And how do we identify data gaps, for example, right? I think those are the use cases where people are already experimenting with it. I mean, this is not a US example, but I know people in Brazil, for example, they're using this to evaluate credit risk because the data is sparse when it comes to evaluating a farmer's credit risk, especially for small and medium business farmers. They might not have all the data. And these models help them get a better sense of somebody's credit risk. So I think this is something that Lawrence talked about, which is, don't think about it as just solving that one particular problem, but what can you do around it so that solving that problem becomes much easier? So how can you wrangle the data much more easily? Can you identify data gaps much more easily and quickly? So there are a lot of examples like that around it as well. Whether we throw out the Fair As Act models and replace them with AI models, that remains to be seen. I don't think that's going to happen overnight. But there are a lot of other things surrounding writing a credit report, for example, that people have started using. So you calculate the credit score, but then you have to generate a credit report based on all the factors that you've seen. Okay, you're getting a 750, and here are the reasons why you're getting that, right? And so generating that report is something that we've seen people already using AI models to do that, right? And that can automate the process and make it easier. And what this does is it frees up time for your people to focus on things that they're really good at, customer relationship, or maybe calling up more customers to send them the relationship. And you can decide how you want to use that extra time. But we're already seeing examples of people using it across different industries.
Yeah, that ties into the Ranjit's question a little bit, Rishi. And you can use custom GPTs, Rajit, to upload data like from whether it be like the FRED data or local farm data that's published into some of these as source data too. So as you kind of look at those two questions together, don't forget that you can insert data in for your queries. So I would look at doing that in that instance, Ranjit.
Yeah, and also kind of to Ranjit's question, some of this is not necessarily AI, it's just lack of data. And so if you take crop lending, for example, the traditional practice has been, hey, whatever the farmer tells us in terms of yield, we're going to use that and just discount it to get to a loan to value. And if you had actual yield data coming from either, field view, FMS systems, or something like that, you could kind of apply more veracity to that number and feel more confident in increasing the loan to value, which benefits the farmer and also benefits the bank. Also kind of on after the loan's been processed, but once you're talking about managing risk around collateral, and is the crop there that we've loaned against? Is it in the ground? What stage is it in? Is there irrigation issues, weather issues, any of that? That all can, for most cases, be managed in a way leveraging AI through computer vision and satellite imagery, such that you don't have to send people in vehicles to actually go and view the farm, or at least reduce the frequency of that. And so actually in banking, I see lots of different use cases where this is applicable, because a lot of those are soft edge problems. You're managing risk. You're coming up with scores that are weighted with other scores. And so they're not catastrophic in and of themselves.
All right, kind of leaning a little bit on some of the expense side of things. Michael here asked what software you might suggest in getting started with good OCR and also an LLM that could learn some items. He talked a little bit about maybe AP expense cycle. And maybe give this a bigger, overview. And so, obviously we're not endorsing any specific company. There's a lot of different ones out there. That's a footnote from CoBank standpoint, but, everybody's trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. So if you guys want to chime in on this, on where some of those might be an opportunity to look at.
Rashid, so if I can start, and I think you have an answer too, but the first thing I would do, Michael, is look at your current system, because all of these systems know they have to integrate AI, and this is one of the places where I've seen more of it more and more of it all the time. So the first thing I would do, and a lot of times when you're running these ERP systems, they come up with updates all the time, and you're not always looking at them. So I would look internally at those first. So go ahead, Rajesh.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I think if you're using an ERP system, then, Tom is right. They might be adding these things. But if you're not using an ERP system, a lot of these newer models, they're very good at parsing through image data. So you can, capture a few images, label things like, hey, this is, this is sales tax, this is whatever, right? Like, and it will very quickly, within a few trials, it will learn all that very quickly. And then, then you can sort of integrate that in your overall expense workflow, or, receipt whatever it is, you can integrate within that. And that can save you a lot of time. I mean, I'll tell you a quick story. This is from a few years ago. We used to, I was working in logistics, and we had to bill about 3,000 different trucking companies. And our accounting team would actually individually send them emails. Oh, you need to pay us $100, you need to pay us $50, you need to pay us $2,000. And two people would spend 2 weeks every month doing this, because it was a manual process. And with a little bit of programming, we're able to basically generate a Excel file and sort of pump all that data within QuickBooks, and go from 2 weeks to like 2 days. Just all they were doing was just finding exceptions, right? So I think that is the beauty of these tools. You can really get like 10x improvement in certain specific workflows. So all I would say is try it. You will be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, one quick point on that one. We just kind of solved a similar issue, not in the ag space, but in construction, in receiving a bunch of invoices that are itemized with parts. And there are lots of different OCR models that can do that now, but you do have to train them per vendor almost. It is to the extent that each vendor provides a different format. So that's sort of one way to do it that is fairly is probably the most cost optimized. But the LLMs are also really good at this. The problem with the LLMs though is the token cost back and forth. So when we kind of ran the numbers, it was about $1 an invoice in terms of token cost to be able to get that back. And so if you count the number of invoices and times that by $1, it kind of on a monthly basis, it kind of points you in the direction that you need to go.
Shifting gears a little bit, but we've talked about workflows, automation. One of the questions said, in your experience, have you seen AI being used to provide farm workflows, automation, help predict what to plant, when to plant, fertilize, harvest, when to sell? And so, yeah, maybe Lawrence, because I know that your agronomist tool provides some of that insight, but share a little bit more about how that knowledge is able to be pulled from this tool.
That's interesting. So, okay, so two parts. I heard when to sell. So that's like the holy grail. I know some traders that believe that they have that recipe figured out. I don't entirely know if that's open knowledge, but they tend to keep that stuff pretty proprietary. And so I don't know how they do that, or how, to the extent how accurate it is. On the agronomic side, I'm on the fence with it. Part of a long time that we spent where I met Rishi here was at the Climate Corporation, and they've been in this space for a very long time trying to forecast yields and figure out what inputs and what seed hybrids and all of what practices, when you execute these instructions, generate the largest yield. And the problem with all of it is that you've got weather in the middle of this, and weather is inherently really challenging to predict. And so I think that we've decided, because it's such a hard problem. Number one, you've got weather involved. Number two, the data is still very siloed, and there's not enough data on any one farm that is in one place to be able to make accurate predictions off of it. And so I think in a lot of ways as an industry, we've kind of, on the technology side, given ourselves a little bit of a black eye by claiming that we can do a lot of these things. And so what you've really had kind of happen is like, hey, everybody, I think, kind of agreed on the technology side. This is really hard to solve, this holy grail problem. So we're going to create a lot of point solutions because we know that these things are accurate. And you end up over the last 5 years in an industry with hundreds and thousands of point solutions that both growers and retailers alike have to have to work with individually, which is extremely inefficient. And so for us, there has to, this is the problem of interoperability. And I think that the interoperability of data needs to be solved first before we can start tackling those problems. In the meantime, I think there's lots of other problems to tackle outside of the agronomic ones that you can focus on with the current data, state of data, and the current state of technology. And that's kind of where we've been focusing on, is on this. How do we, enable and augment the sales teams and kind of staying away mostly from a lot of the hardcore agronomic problems.
Right, we are approaching our end, and I always, my last question is always, what's the question that I didn't ask that I shouldn't ask, but that I didn't ask that I should have asked, but also too, when people click off and they are kind of sorting through what they learned, if there's one takeaway that they could take from your comments today, what do you want them to remember? And I'm going to start with you, Rishi, and then we'll go to Lawrence and end with Tom. So Rishi, go ahead. What's your elevator speech, your 1 minute takeaway?
Yeah, I think the cost of experimentation has gone down significantly, and you can realize value quickly based on what use case you choose. That's number one. Number two is if you remember that vertical line of ChatGPT, this is valuable. So engage with this yesterday. If not yesterday, start from today. And it might feel that you're not getting value tomorrow. And so then in that case, remember Amara's law, you might overestimate what you might get. And number three, this is something that both Tom and Lawrence said, don't just think about a particular problem, like think around, what are other things holding back in solving those problems. Maybe that's where you might, get more answers in how to apply this. And always start from what outcome you're looking for, right? What is the business outcome you're looking for? Don't think of this as like, I want to try AI. That's great. But at the end of the day, as a business, you have to solve a business problem.
Very good. Lawrence, we'll go to you next.
Yeah, I think two takeaways. The first takeaway is that there's no moat around the technology itself. The moat is in your organization's their mindset to change and their ability to absorb change. So if you do a lot of micro POCs and all of them sort of fail, but your company is now have the mindset of being nimble and agile and willing to accept this, that's your moat. The second thing is, I see a question down here, what level of expense will be added to a business's bottom line related to AI spend over 3 to 5 years? And I don't think it's quantifiable. I think it's so important that you're going to be looking at it as a percentage of revenue, just like you would look at for marketing. You're going to look at AI as how much are we investing in AI and benchmark yourself against what your competitors are spending.
Very good. Tom, we'll hand it over to you for the final takeaway.
Yeah, I'll just keep it quick. I mean, AI is not going to fix your broken systems. So let's get your systems in order so that we can leverage AI so that it will really, really turn your business into something that you want it to be.
Excellent. Well, just so a quick reminder, thank you for everyone who joined us today. We're going to have a call, the recording available later. We're also going to give some information on each of our speakers. So if you guys would like to reach out to them, you can. Again, thank you to each of our speakers. So many things for us to learn from today. And again, thank you so much and have a great afternoon.